Welcome everyone to another episode of Tactical Debrief. I am Joshua Joshi Howard. I'm joined today by Scott Cairns, the most recent GT winner that we had in the Astra Militarum. So first off, Scott, thank you so much for doing this and congratulations on your win at the most recent event. How does it feel to have won a GT?
Feels good. I did GTs a lot more back in like 2018, 2019, and I would always go. I think the best I did was 5-1, and a lot of like four and two, and then you're like, oh, I learned a lot. And then this event, there were two games for sure where I could have lost, and then I would have been like, oh yeah, I learned a lot. But I still learned a lot, but managed to go 6-0,
Yeah, that's
so it felt
awesome.
good.
I've only ever played one GT that had 6 games. Pretty much every other one that I've done is normally 5 games. So, I mean, how do you just have the
Right.
stamina to just play 6 games of 40K in 2 days?
Um, the first 3 days are always fine because it's an RTT. And then I found that because there were 60 players, if it was 5 rounds, you're actually kind of more stressed out in each individual game undefeated because you need to score high to beat that other guy who's also going to be 5-0. But when you're undefeated in a 6 round event like this, okay, I'm ahead. I just need to win. I just need to hold out, and the individual like stress of each game is less.
Interesting. I guess I've never really thought about it like that, but it is because you have fewer undefeated players at the end. You don't have as many of these like tiebreakers that you have to think about.
Right,
Yeah.
right. We were guaranteed to only have one 6-0 player.
Yeah.
So round 4, 5, and 6, like early on in the game, I think, okay, even if I just win 70-60, it'll be okay.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. So let's go ahead and start talking about some of the things I sent you. So the first thing I was kind of curious about, you said you played a lot of events back in like 2018, 2019, but how long have you actually been playing 40K?
I mean, I have my oldest Space Marine models with their shoulder pads put on sideways and terribly painted are from when I was in like elementary school and middle
Wow.
school. But I think I had like the third edition rule book, but didn't really understand any of it. I got back into the game in the very end of seventh edition and started playing competitively in eighth edition. Um, that was pretty fun. And then I went to LVO 2018, I think, uh, and then kind of stopped playing competitive 40K and then got back into it, but only at like the RTT level because we moved from Seattle to Ohio.
Oh.
And there was like a really great uh, competitive scene in Ohio where they had like a monthly RT. They had two RTTs a month at the same store, and one of them was actually is one of the like main organizers of one of those RTTs is Folger, the Eldar player in
Oh,
the
yeah.
LVO finals, who got
Yeah.
box card. But it'd be like in a 20-player RTT, there's 14 or 15 guys who are gonna just kill any GT. Um,
So
so
you
I
got
felt like I
prepared
was
to win then.
playing. I felt like I felt like I was getting a lot of like high level opponents and high level games, just not really going to the 2 day events.
That makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like you had like a bit of time where you're playing just kind of for fun, and then what kind of drove you to actually start playing the more competitive part of 40K?
The Seattle scene is also pretty competitive. There's pretty much a GT every weekend within a 3 hour drive. Um, and I just felt like I kind of gravitated towards more competitive play, um, because I kind of like that like 40K you can just kind of devote infinite mental energy to the task, and then you find other people who are also interested in doing that. So I tried it, and it's also kind of like when you just want to go to like the local game store and like find a pickup game. If you're gonna just totally beat your opponent so badly, like they're not really gonna have that much fun. Um, but if you're say like, hey, I want to play a competitive practice game, even if you get beat badly or you beat your opponent badly, they're interested to know like, hey, what could we have done differently?
That's super cool. Yeah, I actually grew up in the Seattle area, but I was not playing competitive 40K at all for a long time. Actually, only fairly recently started, but it's super cool to hear that there's strong scenes kind of everywhere you go. It sounds like you didn't start off as a guard player. You mentioned some of your Space Marine models with, incorrectly modeled
Right,
Space Marines, but
right.
when did you start playing the guard originally?
So yeah, my first ever models were Blood Angels, and then at the start of Eighth Edition, Imperial Soup was like what was great. And so I had wanted to play Blood Angels, but I needed 32 guard models to fund all the command points. And then um, my guard collection just started to grow, and I didn't really buy any more Blood Angels. And then when they finally ended up killing Soup, uh, I had all these small. I have like the 3 Custodes jet bikes from when three jet bike captains are good. I have Saint Celestine from when Saint Celestine was good, and I have a couple of Blood Angels. But my guard collection just grew and grew. So when they killed Soup, I went pure guard.
That's so funny. I know I've heard so many stories about like that era, but is there something that drew you to guard, or is it just what you kept needing to buy in order to keep your soup as healthy as possible?
Um, when I had my Blood Angels with a small guard auxiliary, I painted the guard red so that they could represent like the Ball Planet Defense Force.
Yeah,
And then when I went pure guard, they might still be like a ball light regiment, but now I just call them the Red Guard. Um, and I I think the lore of the guard is more interesting to me. Like if I'm in like a Barnes and Noble and I'm in like the Warhammer science fiction section, like I picked up like the Primarchs novel, and it just wasn't really like that engaging for me. There are all these like super like almost like Olympian style Greek god mythology. But when you pick up like a Gaunt's Ghosts novel, you can kind of like put yourself in that scene. And like I like World War II movies, like Enemy at the Gates could be somewhere in the Imperium, Saving Private Ryan, Fury, all that stuff.
yeah.
So I just think they're much. I think they're much more relatable and the true heroes of
That's
the
fair.
story.
I do think that without the guard, without like the just normal humans in 40K, it'd be really hard to understand like how powerful some of these things are. And so that's kind of what drew me to it too,
Exactly.
right? It's just at the end of the day, it's just a guy and his gun, and he's gonna stand up for, you know, a bit of a weird government, but it is his government nonetheless at the end of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it sounds like so you played some Blood Angels. Have you played other armies as well?
Yeah, I had right now I have a competitive Grey Knight list, and my Blood Angels are starting to catch up. Like I could probably run 2,000 points of Blood Angels. That would be all right. Um, but those are the only 2 other armies that I have serious collections of.
Fair. And so, with all of this, then having experimented with a couple of different armies, how would you really describe your ideal playstyle in 40K?
Um, I like to. I would say my playstyle. I like to have like a balanced list where I can look at the mission and the opponent's list and have some things that I can do to operate differently or use certain units differently. Whereas maybe like, I don't know, a World Eaters list or an Iron Storm, Iron Hands list might be more one directional every single game. Um, so I feel like one of the biggest problems I had, especially like when I was playing in Seattle, and anyone from Seattle who sees this would know, is I would get so lost in my own head that I would play a really good like turn 1 and 2, and then the judge will yell dice down.
Oh no.
So I do like the meme with all the equations and stuff
Yeah,
flashing
yeah, yeah.
by the head. Like I let that I would say that's like kind of my play style, but I need to get I've learned to get a lot faster and make tons of good decisions instead of trying to search for the optimal decision for every single unit. But typically, I'd say I like to go for the middle of the board, and then I like to, at least with this list, it's kind of symmetrical, and that there's 2 Dorns, there's 2 units of 6 Bullgryn, um, and so I think I can split out to either side, and then they might be able to meet strength on one side but not the other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you started talking about it a little bit, so it feels like a very natural segue. Let's go ahead and start talking about the list that you actually brought to this event, because I remember when I was looking at it, it felt fairly typical of what a lot of the competitive guard lists currently are looking like on the most June data slate. But could you take us through all the different pieces that you brought?
Yeah, so I've got the Lord Solar unit as standard. I do have a mortar in the command squad, which I think is really important. Then I have Creed, who's pretty standard, but I'm having her lead 10 Kasrkin, which might be a little bit different. Um, she can't double stack orders anymore. And so she's going to hand out 2 orders, and the Kasrkin are going to hand out 1. But that extra floating order was good because she's almost always within range of at least a Scout Sentinel or the Armored Sentinels. So that order isn't getting wasted. Or she'll be in range of Lord Solar's unit, so she can give them something, and then they radio out their platoon order. And then Gaunt's Ghosts, I think they're auto include, at least for me. And then what else do I have? The 3 Armored Sentinels, the 12 Bullgryn, the 2 Dorns, the Exterminator, and the Scions. The Scions are really, really good.
Yeah. Yeah, so normally I was gonna initially ask about the Armored Sentinels, but now I'm a little bit more curious how you're using your Kasrkin, because I know a lot of people have kind of shifted away from this, especially since the points went up on the April data slate, but it
Right.
sounds like you are using them potentially in a bit more of a defensive role than a lot of people are used to seeing.
Yeah. So for this event, the terrain was fixed all 6 games except for 2 small um, obscuring rectangles that would like shift orientation map to map.
Oh, interesting.
Um,
So it wasn't a normal
but
like G-Dub or WTC terrain layout?
it was, I'm not too familiar. There's like this whole meta down here in Texas called the TCC.
Okay.
And I don't know, the terrain here was definitely a little wonky because there were no footprints. Um,
Oh,
and the terrain was kind of all oriented along a north-south axis, so nothing was like tilted at all. So it might be super constricted, like going exactly vertically, but then they had all these open diagonals. Um, and then
interesting.
you don't have the footprints for like an infantry squad to completely hide behind. If you're inside that L, someone's going to shoot you from an angle. So I can't really outflank Creed because then I'm losing a ton of her utility.
Yeah.
So Creed's unit would typically start always inside the home large L, and then they had like the small center L to like move forward to stage. And then a lot of times, if I'm going second, then the opponent moves out, and on turn 1 they can come out from the home L and actually shoot something. Because a lot of opponents will just try to like bum rush the guard list, and then Creed's going to go out and do damage. But if I'm going to go first, or if I don't really have a good turn 1 damage play, they get move, 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 and take cover, and then they can stage right in that center L and do something like deploy a homer or cleanse. So it's a
Yeah.
really strong unit.
Interesting. Now, the other one that I was very curious about is I'm still not yet convinced that Armored Sentinels are super competitive, but you're clearly having
Right.
some good use with them. So I'll go ahead and ask the first part of the question as a bit like I guess more like general question is I've always felt that Armored Sentinels kind of sit in this weird spot where they're a good unit, but pretty much anything you could ask Armored Sentinels to do, there's something else at the same price or cheaper that could do that job better. What do you think about that?
So, at least in my list, it was definitely a decision. Well, it wasn't too much of a decision because I only own 12 Bullgryn, but you could definitely have the 195-point Sentinels turn into 180 points of 6 more Bullgryn and just have 18 Bullgryn.
Fair, sure.
But so, what the Armored Sentinels do that's different from the Bullgryn is they can take that platoon order. So Lord Solar, his unit, you get the 3 good orders that can go on anyone, and then you get that 1 platoon radio order. So the Armored Sentinels are basically serving that same kind of like forward line that I'm okay with you coming into contact with, but that forward line, if it's 3 units of Bullgryn and they all need to do something on the next turn, that's all 3 of your Lord Solar orders. And I didn't have a tank commander to order a Dorn. So I would always have to decide, like, okay, do I need this Bullgryn unit to move 9 inches this turn because it's going to turn off one of my tanks? So those Armored Sentinels, they kind of have that same role as the Bullgryn without eating that 3rd Lord Solar order. And then the first reason I looked at them after the change is you only get that 1 reinforcements now per game, and they changed it to where now you get your hunter killers back. So we started off with respawning hunter killers, then it took away, and now it comes back. And then of course they get the always lethal now with platoon and squadron.
Yeah, the 9th edition Born Soldiers.
Right. Yeah. So they got a points cut and they got the lethals buff. I thought I'd give them a try, and they did really good.
Yeah. So how did you tend to play them on the board? You said that you sometimes use them as kind of like pseudo Bullgryn, where you're just okay with people running into them. But was that their normal job, or what else did they do?
So it was specific to the terrain of this map layout, where all up and down the the long lanes of the board were 5-inch wide alleys. So every single ruin was exactly 5 inches away from the edge of the map. And then you had all these long diagonals off of that because there's no footprints. It's just like an L MDF, all oriented north-south. So a lot of the times, if I didn't need them to be like stopping, like for example, like a Space Wolves all-out charge, they would be along the side where a 13-inch move is going to get them like a target, and then that alley is blocked off by those Armored Sentinels. So that's what they did most of the games, and then just depending on what the mission was and what I needed them to do, sometimes they would go to the midfield, because after I shoot their armored or their hunter killers, and maybe like they've taken some damage, I kind of want them to die because I need them to respawn and come in somewhere way more important. So at that point, then they're just moving up, overcharging, bonking things, trying to be annoying. And a lot of times opponents won't shoot them because there's no point. They don't have their hunter killers. There's like 2 or 1 left, and I'm going to get 3 if you dedicate resources to it.
Gotcha. And then if they don't shoot it, then you still just have a unit running around that's always threatening to score you points or, nuisance charge something on the board. So I kind of see it. I guess the big question then is, the next time you go to a GT, whenever that might be, would you play them again?
Under the current rule set, I would definitely play them again. The only thing that I would consider is having them be a unit of 2 versus a unit of 3, just because, most importantly, a 2-man Sentinel unit is never battle shock, never has to test for battle shock. And it was so like nerve-wracking and annoying when they would get down to 1 Sentinel, and then I either have to auto pass them because I need them to die, and then it's a 3 CP respawn and my auto pass gone, or it's just you don't know, you can't really plan your turn until you know whether they pass their battle shock or not. And then the other reason why 2 Sentinels is nice is when you're actually deploying them, you can usually fit like 2 in a tank-sized gap. but that third one is either, the third one, that line might be too long, or you have to like put that third one kind of like back in like a V or a triangle or an L, and then that's going to take the spot where another tank might be.
Interesting.
So like, and you might be able to get through an alley to C, but not with all three Sentinels, but maybe two could get there, or maybe you could get the Sentinels up, but that tank that you just blocked out, now it can't get up there.
Yeah.
But under the theory that I want to max out that respawn value, I might just stick with three.
Interesting, yeah. Because I was definitely wondering is if you had two, it feels as though like the footprint, especially for like move blocking and charging, would be a little bit
Right.
smaller. But if you're finding that you can't move the third one anyway, then it does make sense that, it might drop down to two. But that's pretty cool. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
The other thing I would say is if some list is going to hit you really hard on turn one with either shooting or like Angron melee or a bunch of 8-bound, you can't really deploy. You have to be careful with them on turn one, because at least for me, I'm bringing them for that great respawn value, but I only have 1 CP on the top of turn one. So in some situations, I had to hide them. But when they don't really have something that's going to kill them efficiently, they're going to be right up on the line with the Bullgryn.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's really cool. I think it is always fun because I know like the last guy I talked to, I did another interview with Matt Wright, and he brought a Trojan support vehicle, which is it's like
Right.
I didn't even fully know what it did. It's like I know it heals a little bit, but hearing all these cool things.
He had the storm sword,
Yeah,
right?
he was. Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense to give that one vehicle reroll
Yeah,
ones.
when you have that many
Uh,
guns, it ends up working out. But I was just
yeah,
surprised because I just haven't seen it in any competitive list. And I think you're the first person. Yeah, you're the first person who has done well in the event who's actually brought like this max size unit of the Armored Sentinels. So, whenever some new tech comes through, it's always cool to see.
I was pretty happy with
Yeah,
them.
awesome. So let's go ahead and start talking about the event a little bit because I've got a match history on my side where I got to see what all of your opponents were playing, but I don't know the players at all, and I don't know how the games went. So let's go ahead and start with the first one because you actually were playing up against a Dark Angels player who was playing Inner Circle, which I have seen become a little bit more popular over the past couple of weeks. So was there anything interesting that happened in the first game?
Yeah, when I first walked up to the table, he said like, "Hey, uh, nice to meet you. I don't play very often." And I'm thinking to myself like, okay, man, this is a pretty sweet, like, lucky pairing for me, Marine player who doesn't play that much. But his list was actually very durable. He ended up killing 11 out of 12 of the Bullgryn over the course of the game.
That's no small
Um,
feat.
yeah, and the 4 wound Terminators with -1 damage were very difficult to deal with. Um, but I ended up realizing, so when I was like, when the pairings first go up and I'm looking at his list, I'm thinking like, this doesn't seem that optimized. I didn't realize until later at the awards that he was playing, that they had a specific Highlander category that he was in. So he only had one of each data sheet intentionally to
Yeah.
be in that category. Um, so yeah, there's only one Land Raider, one unit of Terminators, and so he went kind of all in with. He had a big brick of 10 Terminators with 2 Terminator leaders, and he had the enhancement to deep strike on turn one, and he went first. So then he deep strikes like right in the middle of the board, 9 inches away from my Bullgryn and Sentinels, but then fails his 9-inch
Oh no.
charge and has the free reroll and fails the 9-inch charge again. So then going into my turn, it's like the perfect shooting buffet. Like his entire army is right out there. I barely have to move up to get into like melta range, multi-melta range, melta-gun range. So I ended up killing the entire Terminator brick with my entire army. And then that shut down like his like center presence. And then he had some stuff on the sides that took a while to kill, but I still have the center control. And I believe on that map, one objective on the side is like safe for me because it's like inside an L pointed towards me, and one is safe for him pointed towards him. But now that I have the center, it's I'm gonna win on primary.
Yeah. And that's brutal too, just missing that 9-inch charge, because I know those Terminator bricks are like 500 something points, and it's just when you lose
Oh
that, yeah.
yeah, and there's nothing you can do when you're just
Yeah,
watching him roll, and then you see he's got a reroll. So yeah, it was against that list and against Space Wolves later,
yeah.
like failing the 9-inch charge. Like if they make it, I'm not talking to you right now.
Yeah, I've definitely lost games off of those 9-inch charges, but I've also won them, so it all always comes around. Looks like your next game you had up against an Imperial Knights player who also did pretty decent. So what happened in your second game?
So second game, he has Canis, an Atropos, and a Lancer, and then he has three of the smaller knight, the baby
Yeah, the
knights,
Warglaves
and then
probably?
I think
The
it was
Melta ones?
one Helverin and two
Gotcha,
Warglaves, so
okay.
one autocannon, one and two Warglaves, and then he had a couple. I think he had like a 5-man Inquisition unit on his home field, and then he had Kyria Draxus with acolytes on that he was going to use to push one of the neutral objectives on the side. Um, but and he also had Mysterious Guardian on the Atropos. So, and that's the one that like shoots pretty well into tanks.
Yep.
And so I said, okay, yeah, I'm gonna deep strike my Scions. Are you gonna deep strike your Atropos? And he said, no, I want it on the board. I need everything against. I want to kill as many tanks as possible early. And I just thought that was kind of strange because Mysterious Guardian gives you deep strike and one up down, so you can deep strike and then do it one more time. But he just started on the board, so that's like I don't know, 40% of the value gone. And then he said he was telling me that he wanted to play as aggressively as possible, but then he still deployed all three of his big knights like in his home corner
Oh,
to hide potentially. So I felt like if I don't know, I thought if he was gonna really if he thought my list was like really intimidating for some reason, then maybe he really leans into like, okay, if I go first, I can win. But he ended up going first and didn't really have any effective shooting because I'm also pretty well hidden. Um, and then he sends his Lancer all the way across because it has some crazy move and can go through walls. But then is only able to charge a unit of Bullgryn through a wall. Not through the wall, but I'm right up against
yeah.
the wall, and so he's fighting me. And then he kills a decent amount of them, but I could have lost the whole unit and been fine because now he's got that one big knight right there, and his other knights haven't really like developed their positions yet. So I killed the Lancer, and then going into his turn, he uses his Mysterious Guardian that he could have just had that been his deep strike because he
Yeah.
didn't really shoot with it in the first turn anyway. But he brings his Mysterious Guardian down in range of my one of my Rogal Dorns, and he walks Canis out to also shoot at that Rogal Dorn. And I'm like, okay, I mean, I guess I'll pop smoke with my only CP. And I was thinking, like, man, like, it's gonna die. Like, am I just really gonna lose a Dorn and my CP here? But I didn't. I thought the Knight reroll was like one hit roll and one wound roll, but it's
Hmm.
a hit roll of one and a wound roll of one.
Wait, did it get changed back?
No, 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 no.
Oh,
So they can reroll one hit roll of one and one wound roll of one per activation.
I
But
thought that got changed.
I thought
That's
it was
crazy.
I thought it was just one. You could reroll one of each,
Yeah.
so you can't reroll twos. And both of those knights hit on twos, and I popped smoke, so he's hitting on threes. And he just rolled so many twos to hit and wound. And like I used my blank on one attack, and then I made a couple of I think like 5-up saves because he's AP4, but I have cover from smoke. And so Canis and the Atropos unload into my Dorn, and I take 3 damage, which is
That's ludicrous.
which
Yeah.
is even more lucky than dodging those 9-inch charges. So yeah, I mean, it was like it was that kind of run for the whole event for the most part. I mean, I feel like I got lucky in a lot of situations. Um, but yeah, that was basically the end of that game, because
Yeah.
then his knights have come into line of sight of that point, and I can roll everything on and clean up.
Yeah.
But
And you definitely have enough firepower to bring down at least one big knight per turn, pretty much.
right,
Yeah.
and the Dorns, they just have and the Exterminator too. Like, you have a ton of that high volume 3 damage attack.
Yeah.
So the knight's like, okay, how many wounds does it start with? Like 25. Okay, shoot, I just got 5 wounds through. That's 15 damage. So
Yeah. It's brutal.
they can definitely shoot stuff down.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you got a little bit lucky in your first two wins, but both your opponents ended up going 3-3 in the event. So you definitely had a tough event the entire way through. But next you ended up having to play against Space Wolves, and I started seeing the Champions of Rust actually pop up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But how did this game go?
This player is very like well known like as a good player.
This is David
Um,
Hall, right? If I remember correct.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, David Hall,
He's very good.
and
Yeah.
yeah, he's really good. And I've played him the like the monthly RTT that I go to here is like a competitive is branded as like a competitive practice. So they will just simulate like their player packet for the RTT will just be like the day one of some upcoming GT like the next week. So I've seen him a lot there, and I've played him a few times. And the only time I beat him is when he was playing some like super meme list with like a Knight Porphyrion that I
I don't even
won.
know what
And
that
then
is.
I didn't know either, but it's huge. It's huge and kind of shoots good into guard with no invuln.
Cool.
But I played him. I think I've played him, and I have that win, and then I have a loss against him at those RTTs. So when I saw that I was paired up into him on round 3, I was like, okay, like, this might be where the run ends. But then it ended up coming down to he also failed a critical 9-inch rerollable charge with his Terminators, and then I cleaned him up. But his list, I thought Space Wolves would be like Thunderwolf cavalry everywhere, and like that guy who's on like a big sled. But he only had one unit of Thunderwolf cavalry, and then he had like a repulsor executioner and a bunch of like walking Terminators, the Wolf Guards with the 4 wound
Interesting.
Storm Shield. Yeah, so it was a slower list, but he had I think he had 2 impulsors with like the scary epic characters. I think one of them had assault intercessors, and he had a blade guard with Judiciary. So he was definitely teched into lists that are not guard.
Yeah.
Um, and he basically tried to cross the board as quickly as possible, but it wasn't like a turn 1 connection like other lists might be able to do that want to Alpha Strike Guard in melee. So he went first, and I'm sure he did not want to go first because he had his Repulsor Executioner, which is probably like his most dangerous unit to me, at least early on. Because even when he connects on turn 2, it's going to be into Sentinels and Bullgryn, and I'm not too threatened yet. But he had to move that Repulsor Executioner out to get any value of it. And then it doesn't have the big gun doesn't have enough shots to really scare a Dorn, because I think it's like a 2-shot on the laser destroyer, and I'm just going to blank one right
Yeah.
off.
And even though
So
the other one's
even
like D6+4 or something silly, like, well,
right,
you have
right.
18 wounds.
Right. So he had to move his anti-tank, ranged anti-tank out on turn 1 to do something, and then I pretty much focused my entire return turn of shooting into killing that, which I was able to do, and pushing my like melee wall up a little forward just so he's not going to contact me like in my own deployment zone. And then the mission was Ritual, where you set up new objectives, which is super annoying. But it basically what ends up happening is like you can set the first one up basically right outside your own deployment zone at like a slight angle off middle. And then the second one that you set up on the next turn, you also can measure from the center, and it just has to be 6 inches away from the one you set up on the first turn, which means you can control it from like you control 2 objectives right there with like one model.
Yeah.
And so he was setting up his little constellation, and I was setting up mine. But his list is coming, his whole army is coming at me in like a wave, and he has, I think, like one unit of infiltrators in the backfield. So what ended up happening is, as he's like breaking down my castle wall in the midfield, I have Gaunt's Ghosts and the Scions and some Scout Sentinels getting into his objective cluster. And then even when he's like totally like breaking me at the end of the game, I'm still maxing primary because I have some trash units on his side that are still holding 3.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, he was a really good player, and the final score does not indicate like how close the game was. But when he finally dropped his Terminators and failed the 9-inch charge, that was probably the game.
I mean, that's really cool though. Just finding wins, even if it requires a little bit of luck against those really good players, is it has to feel really good, even if it just like breaks off a couple of dice rolls. Then after that,
Right.
day 2 must have been easy, right? You beat David Hall, and then you have, the rest of the turn to play against.
Yeah, yeah. It, like from previous 2-day events that I had gone to like years ago, I remembered like, okay, I'll have all night to prepare for round 4. But then the pairings ended up shifting. I didn't, because there was some, I think, either strength of schedule or paint or some sort of overall metric ended up changing the
Oh
pairings
no.
twice. So I learned a ton about Death Guard and Black Templars, and then ended up playing Chaos Space Marines, which I
Yep.
didn't realize I was going to have. So I had basically like no prep, and I didn't know a ton about Renegade Raiders. But this was Russell Tassin, who I didn't know. I didn't recognize till after the game, but he was recently hired by Art of War
Awesome.
as a coach or brand ambassador, and I only realized that because I remember like, wait, I saw like a Facebook or a YouTube post like, yeah, oh yeah, you're that dude, cool. Um, so he was playing a lot of it was like a lot of Legionnaires and a Vindicator and some anti-tank Predators and Abaddon with some Terminators, and I felt pretty comfortable against like the data sheets in his list, but he was piloting it really well. Um, but it just in general, Guard is really good at killing like 2 wound Marines
Yes.
with a 3-up 5-up at best, or maybe even a 3-up and no invuln. So I was pretty confident about that, and all of his melee is either damage 1 or 2 or 3 without ignore modifiers, and so Bullgryn are just gonna eat that all day.
Yeah.
Um, so I think he knew that he was in a like tough spot, but when we started the round or started the turn, and it's also Terraform, where if like the player who goes first, if I started off and I had all of the objectives in the neutral objectives going under Terraform, and I'm like, okay, he can't stop it all, and then I'm gonna bank like a ton of free primary over the course of the game. But he ended up stopping them all,
Oh wow.
and that was a problem. And I had Gaunt's Ghosts on the far neutral objective that would be my safe objective. I had them just towing on to the edge, and he has one unit that can advance and charge, and it's coming out of a Rhino that's safely like in his like right up against his deployment zone line, and then but it was kind of off the wall. So this is where what was interesting was happening is I was being like incredibly analytical and critical of like making sure this movement would be correct, because I said like, okay, you can't disembark, you can't just like add 3 inches to your total move, because you wouldn't be able to set up here out of the Rhino because you'd be like phasing through the wall.
Mm-hmm.
But just in general being like very very particular about making sure he got his move right. But even though it was like a super important charge, it was because yeah, it would have been a big point swing based on his secondaries. When it came back to my turn, I wanted to fall a unit of Bullgryn back that he had tied up in the center, and I was not precise about my movement.
Mm.
I just said like, okay, like I can, I'll fit through this gap, I can walk through this wall, and then I'll just go from here to here. And we had called a judge over to see like is a unit that falls back able to like get into the engagement range of another unit. And it
Oh,
turns out
interesting.
so that because he had a rhino, he's like, oh, you can't fall back through here because you'll move within engagement range of the rhino. And I said, I think fallback like overrides that. And the judge said it did. And when the judge said it did, I said, okay, so I'll move from here to here. But my big mistake is I actually picked up that Bullgryn and then like just dropped it near where it would be, because all that matters is it gets out of engagement
Mm-hmm.
range. And that he was not happy with that, and I don't blame him for it, because once I actually pick up the model, now there's I can't go we can't go back to get consensus. It's
Yeah,
where was that model? And then so he ended up getting kind of heated and conceded the game right there.
that's too bad.
But
Yeah.
and it was but it was game at that point, because then I'm gonna shoot his unit. I'm killing the unit that went after Gaunt's Ghost, and it's pretty much the end of the game. Um, but he totally lived up to his new role as Art of War coach, because he just like we have like 2 hours left in the round, and he just like talks to me one on one about how like I wasn't aware of it, but I was generating an incredibly negative experience for him. Like
Interesting.
I was very much I came to the table and I was super focused on winning, and then I'm being like hypercritical of his movement, and then I just like casually pick up my Bullgryn and say like, "Are you good with that?" You know.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
So he gave me a ton of like just general like feedback, and then also like specific useful tips, like, you know if there's going to be something important, don't touch anything until you and your opponent know exactly like where the start and end point are going to be. Or like if you're going to be super analytical and critical of this, then make sure you're also doing it for yourself, or that your opponent has absolutely no problem before you move anything. And like if you're measuring, you need to always account for the fact that like you're looking at it from a top like 30 to 70 degree angle, and so things are not going to look as if they, especially to the opponent who's looking from the opposite angle. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is 6 inches. Like, no, dude, that's like 8.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that was super super helpful, and I felt like really bad about how, because he's also 4-0 or 3-0 at that point, and I've just ended his run. Um, but he, I didn't know him at all before, but he actually like gave me all this advice, even though he should just be like steaming mad and going around telling like how everyone how bad I am. And then my round 5 and round 6 opponents actually said like, that was a really great game. Like I had a ton of fun. Like that was really enjoyable. Good game, good game. Which I did not get any of that feedback round 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
So
That's
I
good.
definitely, I didn't feel like I like really like upset anyone the first 3 rounds, but I didn't get like positive feedback until after I played Russell.
Yeah.
So that was really good.
That's one of the interesting things I think about 40K, right? Is because it is such a collaborative experience, and if there's ever a spot where that like mutual trust breaks down, the game rapidly
Mm-hmm.
becomes not fun very fast. So it is very cool. It is important, right? If we're ever called out on that, that we actually internalize it, because if we're not a fun opponent, people don't want to play against us. We might not people not might not play against us later on. So I'm really glad that that feedback that you got was, one, useful, and two, helped you have some really good games going down the line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There were multiple points in round 5 and round 6 where I was basically reading off my new script, like, hey, I want to move this model to here. Here, I've got this casualty that's identical. Like, I've got this dead Bullgryn. I want to move him to here. Is that right? Okay, okay.
Yeah.
It's going there, and I'm not touching anything until we have everything exactly mapped
Yeah.
out.
So to be very specific with it, then the way that you would try and do it is, if you have a move that is, a really important move in particular, where there's some technicalities to it. It sounds like what you're recommending is do all the measurements and then explaining to your opponents along the way, and then double check, like you said, before anything is actually moved, so that everybody can come to an agreement beforehand. Does that sound right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You would you absolutely cannot say like, is this okay after you've picked up the initial position of the model.
Yeah.
So if there's something to do, like either if you have like an identical guardsman from your casualty pile that you can put there instead, or you can just put a dice down where like the final measurement is going to be, then do that first. And it also doesn't even need to be that particular. Like a lot of times it's going to be like, I need to move here because I need to charge there. Let's just measure the total distance between the two models right now, and then it doesn't really matter where I end up like casually placing it because we know I need a 7 on the charge.
Yeah. That's a big
So
thing. Now, here's an interesting question for you, actually, because I've been playing almost entirely on footprints, and before that, my local meta was player placed for a long time. Um, One of the things that I've really liked about having footprints is that you can just pick up like the MDF or the cardboard or whatever terrain, and then it's easy to measure there. Was that something you were finding an issue with at all on the terrain that you guys had with no footprints?
uh, yeah, it wasn't as practical because there were no footprints, but they did have like little 40 millimeter floors. So
Mm,
it wasn't just like a flat cardboard L. It was like an MDF with like a first floor, a second floor, and a third floor like little insert. And so a lot of the times you're going to pick this thing up and it's going to clip a bunch of models because if you're up against that ruin, like up against the wall, you are on MDF. You are not on the mat.
yeah,
Um, so in certain situations, like if there was actually nothing touching the actual MDF, you could like just kind of like rotate it
yeah,
and get a measurement. But a lot of the times you're measuring it from above.
yeah. And that's where you get some of those odd like perspective things where you got to be very very
Right.
specific on agreeing with your opponent. But I,
Right.
I do want to be respectful for your time, so let's go ahead and go through our last two games. We got Dark Angels and then Adeptus Mechanicus.
So Dark Angels was someone I'd also played before at the like practice RTTs, and he had a pretty unique list of like 3 biker units, max size, like 6 Ravenwing or Black Knights with a command squad, and then he had the support speeders and 2 Vindicators, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time we played at the RTT, I won, and it seemed like a large part of it was that I got to go first, which meant he had to use his 9-inch scout moves defensively instead of offensively. And this time he got to go first, and we were both laughing about it because we're like, okay, this will be a great, rematch where you get to go first.
Yeah.
Um, and then the issue was that his bike units are so big that with the long diagonals and the open alleys on either side, and the fact that his deployment zone ruins have no footprints, there was really nowhere safe for him to aggressively posture, and he had to be like incredibly back with his initial deployment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so his turn 1 attack like was not as deadly as if he had been able to like actually stage in his own deployment zone effectively. And then but he did kind of go all out and didn't really do all that much damage. And then he has the 1 unit in reserves that can come in on turn 1, but they have to come in from the side.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he had defensively postured his 2 board units, they were also going down the sides
Uh,
because the bikes can't go through walls, and I believe they have to pay 2 inches if they want to rotate their
yep.
position at
New pivot
all.
rules.
So he ended up going down the side alleys, and that didn't really give him a good spot to bring in his 3rd unit. And then in the second turn, I had killed some stuff back on my first turn. The second turn, he pulls a 4-action secondary draw. It was I think he got containment and recover assets, and he does not have a ton of like action units. So he ended up choosing to do all those actions, which meant he didn't really like do anything to me, and so I got a second turn of critical damage,
Oof.
and that was it was pretty much over.
Fair enough. And then you had one last game that was the finals going up against Adeptus Mechanicus. Cohort Cybernetica, I believe those are the big battle bots.
Uh, I think they benefit the big battle bots, but this one was running 13 of the Iron Striders.
Oh, cool.
It was three of the melee charging ones and 10 of the shooting ones.
Nice,
Um,
yeah.
so this one, I think because this is my 6th game, and so I'm really familiar with the map or the terrain layout, and then I'm getting better at like picking what my mission plan should be. So when I saw his list, and then I saw that the mission pack was hidden supplies, I picked fixed, bring it down, and cleanse, and that's what won me the game.
Nice.
Because the hidden supplies, I've got my one safe objective in the midfield on my side of like a safe ruin, and then one more objective also on my side of like that safe L.
Yeah.
And all the vehicles that I'm going to have to kill anyway are going to max me on primary. So it was a close game, and it also came down to he put a bunch of shooting into a Dorn that absolutely should have died, probably harder than the 2 knights should have killed that Dorn. And he also rolled a ton of 1s and 2s. And
That's what happens.
I I thought turn 1, because I had to go first and try to shoot and get some shooting in, and I didn't really do that much damage. And then, he doesn't even have to really move because I've exposed myself. I'm like, okay, I might just die here. And then he just completely whiffs in his shooting. And from there, so it definitely, my conclusion was that I can have a really good list and know how to pilot it. But to go 6-0, you often need a good number of lucky breaks.
Fair. Yeah. So I guess the big questions that I have. So let's go back a little bit to talk about the list. Were there any matchups that you were specifically targeting with this list, or anything that you were specifically hoping to avoid?
Uh, I think I wasn't building my list specifically to counter any matchups, but there were definitely things I wanted to avoid. I wanted to avoid the Black Templars and World Eaters, who are going to get up into you in melee, but have an ability to prevent me from falling back.
Mm,
So then the Bullgryn become a massive liability, because if I push that wall forward and they meet it and then I can't fall back, I can't do anything, and they'll just chop me up in my own turn.
yeah.
And then this is just like a guard specific thing, but I don't like playing against the Bellacore demons with I can't shoot them outside of 18, and when I move inside of 18, I might be dead if I don't if I don't kill them. But I felt comfortable. There were a lot of the composition when we were just going through the roster before the event. It was a lot of custodes, knights, chaos knights, and marines of various flavors.
Hmm.
And I felt that my list would be very good into that.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. Looking at your scores, it's pretty obvious that you maybe would have gone for a secret mission in one of them, but how much did secret missions actually play a role in your list building for this event?
Did not secret mission in any of them, but I was definitely thinking about them as options. And then, um, so going into the game and like thinking, am I going to go tactical? Am I going to go fixed? I would look at like, okay, what are my secret missions my options gonna be? But every game it didn't come up, because either things would go my way or I just had the advantage from the start. That turn 3, 4, and 5 is almost like, all right, well, let's just flip cards because I have the entire board now.
Yeah.
Um, and then so like my round 4, we ended up having 84 to 79, but the game had ended basically on the top of my turn 2, and then we just had like a long personal
Yeah.
discussion, and then said, okay, well, what should the score be? And so we just put in like where our models were at the time, and it went up to 84-79. but I definitely thought a lot about secret missions. My opponents never secret missioned either, but I remember looking at, because I have the one battle line unit of Catachans.
Yeah.
And so if opponents' lists did not have a battle line unit at all, because some lists just like skip battle line completely, I was always thinking in the back of my mind, I'm not going to respawn these Armored Sentinels if I'm going to end up doing secret, because I can suicide Lord Solar's unit, respawn the Catachans, and just hold them until the end of the game and pop them into the opponent's deployment zone for that victory.
Yeah, and I also have to be careful on the reverse of that, only running the one battle line, because if they can get a battle line into our deployment zone and your Catachans are dead, like,
exactly.
it's
So
suddenly a 20-point swing.
yeah, this was only something I was considering when I saw lists that had no battle line at all.
Yeah, it's really cool. So we talked a little bit about all the games. Is there a particular moment throughout the entire tournament for like a tactic or something cool that you thought you did that would be really instructive for other guard players?
Let me think. I think running the one Scion bomb is, I would always include that one 15-man Scion unit, not just because of the damage that it'll do on the drop, but if you position it to where it's going to also be able to overwatch something on the next turn that's on an objective, that overwatch with the full rerolls, just fishing for those sixes that are going to be lethal and sustained, is going to hit almost as hard as their initial drop. So I would definitely try to put those Scions somewhere where they'll be able to shoot one thing and then overwatch another thing. And then if people are running the 12 Bullgryn, do not have them within 4 inches of your tanks, because if they get killed in melee and then you get consolidated into, you've lost their, they haven't done their job. Yeah.
I really like the first point that you bring up. I've been harping on this a lot in some of my other YouTube videos is, if you're overwatching with Scions and there's a target and objective, you nearly hit on 3s, right? Because it's a 61% hit. It's actually probably better now. Like this was now that we have lethal hits, but like a 61% hit conversion and a ridiculously good wound conversion considering what we already have. But I love that you bring that up. So then I'm hoping to get a couple hot takes from you, Scott. First thing I'm going to ask is one unit in the guard index that you think is really overrated.
The tank commander is what I would say. I intentionally decided not to bring one. I thought the changes to the tank commander really hurt it. So it doesn't get lethals at all. It already didn't get fields of fire. And the changes to, like, specific changes to how it can't shoot on death. It can't shoot on death if it's engaged. And this event ruled it differently, and maybe it got changed, but if you're killed by a grenade or an explosion or something that's not like an enemy model making an attack, you can't shoot back.
Yeah, that's the new WTC ruling, and I think it's the most ridiculous ruling I've ever seen.
And the Dorn now is only 35 points more.
Yeah.
And the Dorn is just so good at 240. So I think the tank commander is overrated.
Fair. And then could you give me 2 units that you think the guard community needs to take another look at?
Well, I would definitely say Armored Sentinels should get a look. And I would say the combination of having Creed leading Kasrkin, because you're already going to pay 55 points for Creed for her utility. And with the Armored Sentinels, she's not, a lot of times I'm not doing the free fields of fire. I'm using a free smoke on turn 1 for 0 CP, or if I'm going to take a ton of damage too into those Armored Sentinels, I'll do a 1 CP -1 damage.
Oh, that's true. That's not something I'd ever thought about.
Yeah, so that, or it's just 2 CP for smoke and -1 damage. So you're already going to take Creed, and then a lot of people I see either running her solo and she just hangs out near like Lord Solar's command squad mortar, or she will just have her own infantry squad. And I don't think the infantry squad is the play because you have a mortar option in the Lord Solar unit. And I don't think solo's the play because she can't order herself. She's not regiment. She doesn't have grenades. And her order range is only going to be 6 inches. So she really does nothing if she's solo. It used to be that you have like investigate signals, like, okay, maybe she can just sit back there and if I trot, she'll get me those 2 points, but there's no investigate signals anymore. But when you add the Kasrkin unit and they can take 2 orders while only costing 1 of her orders, and they can do a ton of damage from where they are. So like you can still have her near Lord Solar for that mortar utility, but then she can move up right into that ruin that's like right in the center of mid and be safe until she needs to come out.
That's really awesome. That's definitely something I think in particular like the stratagem usage on the Sentinels, like that's a combination that I had never really thought about because it's I think a lot of the community was really high, at least on Reddit. A lot of the community on Reddit really loved Armored Sentinels with the lethal hits into everything, but most of the other
Mm-hmm.
strong guard players I've talked to are like, yeah, they seem okay, but like I could get a Lehman Russ, right? But
Right.
when you
Right.
have all of these pieces creating the synergies together, suddenly it becomes a whole lot more powerful than any one of its parts, which I think is the guard like in a nutshell, right? I think that's what we've always been good at. So I really like this combination that you found.
Yeah. Her and the yeah, it's just -1 CP on any strat on them.
Yeah,
So their tank shock isn't good,
but
but
it's
a
free.
free tank shock, yeah, now we're talking.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's super cool. Are there any shout outs you'd like to give or any future plans you'd like to let us know about before we let you go?
Yeah, I definitely learned the most from my round 4 opponent Russell, so I want to thank him for helping me become a better player. And it went into effect immediately with my round 5 and 6 opponents having positive experiences. And I want to shout out the Sanctum RTT here in Texas, in Austin. It's like that practice RTT that simulates day ones of GTs. That's a really good event. Uh, and I want to apologize to all the people in Seattle when I was still learning how to play 40K, but not quickly. And everyone knew if they matched into me that they'd be lucky to get to round 3. So
Awesome.
I'm playing faster now, guys.
Glad to hear that, the improvement never stops. But with all that said, congratulations once again, Scott, on taking down the Hee Yaw GT down there in Texas. Thank you so much for coming on to all this, and for everyone else, we'll see you guys all next time.
Thanks.